When you view life from a hearse, you just view life with the end in mind. And when you view life with the end in mind and have an opportunity to have a conversation with a 98-year-old lady who remembers everything, you take that opportunity. Sarah Brown Riley of Butler, Georgia, has lived a wonderful life. And if you get the impression listening to this podcast that she's still living wonderfully, you would be correct. But she will tell you a lot has changed in this old world in 98 years. For starters, she met her wonderful husband because she stopped to pick him up on the side of the road in Athens a little over 80 years ago. He was hitchhiking, and it would turn out to be the best ride he ever caught. But what rational woman would stop to pick up a male hitchhiker in 2023? Besides telling us how she met him, Miss Sarah speaks with pride about her Air Force pilot husband, Frank Riley, and his service to his country. She also reveals the horrific story about the Taylor County Sheriff coming to the Butler Methodist Church one peaceful Sunday morning with a telegram to let her future husband's parents know their other son's plane had been shot down and he was missing in action, and ultimately never to be found. But even with the heartache, this is a story about a life well lived for 98 years and counting. From the mouth of an elegant and educated Southern lady who has forgotten nothing, which is an absolute treasure. You will hear from this UGA graduate who comes from and has produced a family of UGA graduates and is darn proud of it. You also hear about living life in a small town where everybody knows your name, and raising boys on a farm, but also raising two girls who were key parts of a basketball team who did not know how to lose. You will hear about a family who still gathers grandchildren, great-grandchildren and all once a year for 2 weeks on an island in Georgia to be together. You will also hear some personal opinions and wisdom about things going on in our country from a lady who has earned the right to give them to an audience who has an obligation to listen. Job says wisdom belongs to the aged and understanding to the old.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I have with me a lady I've known a long time. Her name is Miss Sarah Riley. She's 98, and her mind is better than mine. Miss Sarah, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you. I know people will love to hear from you and a little bit about your life, so thank you for doing this. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Let's start by just you introducing yourself to this audience. Tell us just a little bit about you, Miss Sarah, and a little bit about your life.
I was born December 13, 1924 in Savannah, Georgia. My father was district agent in the Extension Service in the Savannah area, and we lived there until I was 6 years old. Then we moved to Athens and stayed there 1 year, and they decided to send my daddy to Tifton.
Well, Athens is God's country, right?
That is right.
Yeah, it is, no doubt.
We stayed in Tifton 2 years and then moved back to Athens, where I stayed the rest of my school life. My mother was home economist in Johnson County, and Daddy was the district agent in that area. So they got together, and that's when they got married and lived in Savannah.
So how did you end up in Butler, Georgia?
Well, this goes back to the fact that in 1941, when Pearl Harbor happened, they moved all of the boys out of the dormitories, and they had to find rooms in houses around town. And Frank got a room out in Five Points area. And one day when I happened to have the car, I came by, and there in front of the YMCA, where students always stood to hitchhike, was Frank Riley, and I picked him up.
So you're telling me an interesting story. So you actually picked up your future husband. You just picked him up on the side of the road.
I picked him up on the side of the road.
I bet he laughed about that for many years, right?
Yeah. Well, it happened that we had a mutual friend. I had gone to school with Ann Gray from Butler, and she had told Frank to look me up in Athens.
Oh, my.
Well, anyway, that sort of got us off on a good start.
I bet it did. So you were living in Athens. The war started. They moved kids, college students, out of the dorms, and he was there because he was in the war. Now I understand he ended up to be a Air Force pilot in the World War II, right?
Yes, he stayed at the university until he graduated in 1943. Then he went into the Air Force, was a B-17 pilot. Wow. And fortunately, he did not have to go into combat. He was training for ASC rescue when the war ended, and we were very fortunate that he got to come home.
But I also understand, as anybody does in life, during that time, his family especially had a very tragic thing happen. His brother was killed, right? He was missing in action. Yes. During the war. Talk about that just a little bit and how that impacted you and him and his family.
His brother, Harley, who was 2 years older than Frank, was a bombardier on a B-17, and he was shot down in June of 1943 on a big raid that had many bombers flying over the North Sea, going to bomb the submarine locks at Kiel, Germany. Well, Harley Jr.'s plane was one that was shot down, and no trace of that plane has ever been found. But many years later, off the coast of Norway, a fisherman found some remains of Harley's pilot, but no remains of Harley Jr. have ever been found.
Wow.
And it was quite, as you can know, it was quite a blow to the family.
Did you ever meet him?
No.
So that was before you
before
you
I
met Frank.
Frank.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
He had already left the university before I met Frank. I wish I had gotten to know him because he was a big personality. He was a very fine young man. The family never recovered. They were in church one Sunday morning when the sheriff came in and brought a telegram to Mr. Riley stating that Harley had been shot down. And of course, that was something that nobody ever recovers from.
No, absolutely. No way. No way.
No.
Well, he gave his life for this country, and I know that both of you and Mr. Frank, were about as patriotic as people as could be. And I know that what he did, giving his life, means a whole lot to you. As bad as it hurt his family, I know you were proud of him, and they were proud of him.
Yes, very proud of him because he did his duty, right. And he did what he could for this country. And I wish we had more young men like that now.
That was the greatest generation.
Absolutely.
It was the greatest generation. There's no doubt about it. Miss Sarah, I'm going to change subject. I know you got a big family. You've done some traveling. We talk about you've traveled all around, right? And you've been a lot of places, right?
Well, one time I've been out of the country. My mother, after she became a widow, she traveled a lot. And one year she took me to the Netherlands and Belgium to a big flower show. And I enjoyed that very much. We stayed in Amsterdam and rode on the barge on the canal and all of that interesting countryside over there. And my favorite place over there was Bruges in Belgium because it was so historic. Then I went with them one time on the riverboat cruise up the Mississippi, which was interesting, with a New Orleans type band on board. that was fun. But mainly Frank and I traveled. We started in the 1960s going to Jekyll Island to a convention of the Department of Agriculture. And we have continued doing that to this day. We go down there every summer and take all the children to Jekyll.
Why don't you talk about your children? You got a big family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Do all of them come to that?
Yes, we stay 2 weeks now, and they all arrange their schedules so they can all get there at one time or another. They all can't come at the same time for 2 weeks, but
they all
most
come.
of them manage to get there. But we have a good time because I have 9 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren.
Right. But I tell you, getting them together has to be a job.
It is.
It's obviously a priority for your kids to make that happen, and that speaks well of them. I can tell you that's hard to do. I have 9 grandchildren. I can tell you it's hard to get them all in one place. Everybody's got stuff going on.
They all have so much going on.
Let's go back. You grew up in Athens, went to Athens High School.
Yeah.
I tell people I spent 4 years of my life and about 6 years of my daddy's money in Athens. So I was there, I'm very familiar with Athens. So you walked to school when you were growing up, and the school you went to is where Foley Field is now. Is that right, where the baseball field is? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, right there on the corner of Lumpkin Street, there, Barris Street and Lumpkin. That's where my grammar school was. Then I went to junior high and then old Athens High School. I couldn't walk to Athens High School because it was out on Prince Avenue.
Do you still go back to Athens? Do you go visit it?
Oh, yes. Well, I have a grandson who lives there, and my brother lives at Watkinsville, so we go up as often as we can. Until Frank got sick, we had season tickets to all the football games, so we were in Athens a lot. But if you haven't been to the university now, you will not recognize the campus.
Oh, yeah, I still go to games, so I do. It has changed since I've been there 50 years ago.
Oh, it's a big change, yes.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. There's no question about it. So you went to Georgia. Everybody in your family just about has gone to Georgia. How many people that were Georgia graduates in your family? Just about everybody, right?
Just about everybody, yes. I have some grandchildren great-grandchildren who graduated from ABAC, and they didn't come to Georgia, but they have a Georgia campus at ABAC now. You can get a UGA degree from ABAC.
Right, wow.
And so my parents both were there, aunts and uncles and cousins and all the children. So we have a big investment at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, really, for sure. So talk about when you were a student there and dating. I know things that you were talking about, how things have changed. Things have changed a lot about even the way people dress when they go to a football game. Just talk about what you guys did back in those days.
Well, you have to understand that when I was at Georgia, it was during World War II. All of the Georgia boys had left for the service, but our senators, George and Russell, had brought in a Navy pre-flight school to the university, which really kept the university going during those years. They did a lot of building, and they had, it was very nice. The co-eds at the university got to show Southern hospitality to a lot of nice young men. And they had a good dance band, and they built a big gymnasium type place there with a big floor. They had dances every weekend.
I bet you were right in the middle of it too, right?
Well, I enjoyed it, I'll really say that.
That is awesome. That is awesome. You guys, when you went to football games back in those days, you dressed up, right? I mean, today it's a whole different thing, but you wore your finest clothes, right?
Well, my mother's generation especially, when they went to football games, they wore hats, gloves, had big chrysanthemum corsages, the works. Now you go and they barely have anything on. But
you know, when I first started going there, the guys wore coat and ties. That was in '72. I don't know how long they did it, but I don't ever remember wearing a tie. But I know people did anyway. That kind of was going out, I guess, when I came in. Were you in a sorority?
Yes, I was in Kappa Alpha Theta.
Oh, wow. So I know some people from Taylor County that are in Kappa Alpha Theta. So you were living in Athens. Did you live in a sorority house, or did you live at home? How did that work?
No, I lived at home because it was a lot less expensive that way.
I'm sure.
Anyway, and I went to the sorority house frequently, and once a week we had a chapter meeting and always had dinner, and our house mother, Mrs. Norman, always saw to it that the table was set properly and everything was done as it should. And she was a very good house mother, and everything was very calm and peaceful in sorority houses in those days.
And they were training you to be ladies, right?
That's exactly right. We were expected to be ladies, and we did our best.
I think that's probably changed a little bit these days.
I think, from what I've heard, I think it has, but I was in charge of the pledges, getting recommendations anyway. And before we would give an invitation to a girl, we had to have her checked out, be sure she was what we wanted to live in the house.
Right.
So we had recommendations, of course, from alumni in the chapter, but church people, school people, other things like that.
You also, just living in Athens, your parents living there, knowing everybody, you had a active social life and church life in Athens. You went to the Presbyterian Church. Did I understand that right?
Yes, that's right.
And so because you were there, you ended up meeting some personalities, some big names at UGA. Talk about some of those people that you knew, like Dean Tate. I remember him. And some of the presidents. Talk about a little bit the connections you made there over the years.
Well, my parents being in the extension service and in all of the activities that were continued with the university, they knew everybody. Consequently, all the professors knew me. I couldn't get away with anything.
That was not the case when I was there. That was the case when I was growing up, when Bunny's mother, Miss Fuller, taught me. I promise you, whatever I did, my mama would know it when I got home. I'm glad that wasn't happening when I was at Georgia.
Yeah. Well, they all knew me, and but they were very nice. And we knew Dean Tate and President Caldwell, and then Lamar Dodd taught the home ec girls art, watercolor, and that sort of thing, charcoal drawing, and he was very nice, and I didn't realize what a big deal he was at the time, but he went on and really built the art part in Georgia and has a good museum in LaGrange where his home is. And
you became quite an artist, I understand. In fact, your daughter Judy found some of your paintings in a closet at the farm, and my understanding is you're not just an artist, you're a very talented artist. So I guess Dr. Todd is the one that introduced you to that, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, Judy has inflicted my paintings on everybody in the family. I told them, you can put them in the closet or under the bed. But anyway.
I got a feeling they're hanging somewhere besides in the closet and under the bed. I can tell you that. Wow, that's amazing. Are you still painting?
Yes, I'm still doing that. Since I had to move to town from the farm, I don't have as much to do. So I paint and read and that sort of thing.
So I remember going back to Georgia. I remember seeing you guys at football games. Our season tickets were very close to y'all's. You remember that in Athens? We were sitting almost next to each other. I don't know when that was, but at some point we were there. I saw you guys often. So
yeah, you
don't still go to football games, do you?
No. When Frank got sick, we gave up our tickets, and I haven't been back. Well, I've been back to a G-Day game or something like that, but right. And I've been to some of the gymnastics, and I have a grandson who is a tech at the vet school up there, and they go to all the games. Sissy and Lamar go up to all the games. Well, all my family still goes to all the home games and the Florida game and all that.
Well, you've always loved sports. I know we're going to talk about the high school basketball your kids or girls were playing, but you also went to games there. I read where you once took Sissy and Judy to see Pistol Pete play. Boy, Pistol Pete was my hero. I bet that was a treat.
That was, yes. I still remember that game. He was quite a showman.
He was, wasn't he? Was that the game that he did the hook shot from half court or whatever and at the end of the game? I know that happened one time in Athens at one of those games. Do you remember that?
I don't remember whether that, it probably was, but I don't remember that.
Right. Well, I want to go back because we were talking about all the people in your life that went to Georgia. Education period was very much encouraged by your family, the Browns, and they at that point were living near Hiwassee, I think. And talk about them when they went to Georgia, what they had to do to get there. It's different now. You know, it's easy to go from Hiwassee to Athens, but back then they had to walk across a mountain to get on the bus. Is that right? Or the train? It was a train, I guess, right? Yeah.
That was my father, Walter Brown, and they lived, well, on the Hiwassee River there in Towns County. And he went to Georgia. He would ride the train to Robertstown, and then he'd get off day and night and walk across the mountain. There wasn't a road there then, but there was a little road, but not much. But anyway, he knew those mountains well, and he could walk them in the dark. And then he graduated from the university in 17 and became the county agent in Towns County. And then he moved on to the counties around Monroe and then was sent to Savannah. And that's where he met my mother, who was a home economist in Johnson County. And can't you imagine all of the gossip that went on? The county agent was dating this home economist from...
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. He became the director of extension for the entire state, right?
Yes, he was director of extension for a long time, all during the war years. He was instrumental in getting Rock Eagle. The state purchased the land for Rock Eagle, and Daddy made the plans with the people, and they got Rock Eagle there.
I ride by it all the time. Rock Eagle is I'm talking to you from, we got a place at Lake Oconee, and that Rock Eagle is about 15 minutes from here. Huge facility. I've been there. I've spoken at events there over the years, but this whole 4-H connection with your family has been big because your dad was instrumental. That got passed down to your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very much so, especially in Tift County, where Sissy and Lamar lived, and their two children were very active in 4-H, taking part in everything. And then Judy came there, and she was a home economist there. And her daughters, they showed lambs and everything that 4-Hers did, and they really attribute their ability to talk to people from the training they had in 4-H, and they're very proud of it.
They've been involved on state and national level, right? I mean, they've been all around with 4-H. I don't think I gave you the opportunity to say it. Maybe you were not, but I know there's a building named after your father at Rock Eagle, right? And I know there's a Walter Brown Memorial Gardens that's dedicated to him there, right?
Yes. It's a wildflower garden. And then one of the cottages there that the 4-Hers stay in is named the Walter Brown Cottage.
Wow. We're kind of skipping around, and that's okay, but you ended up moving after you married Frank. You guys moved to Butler. You thought Athens was a small town. When you got to Butler, you found out that you didn't know what small was. Talk about it being adjusting to that simple life in Butler where how you met people. Just talk a little bit about that in those days. People don't understand the magic of a small town.
That's right.
Some of the greatest people in this country came from towns very small. I am absolutely convinced of that.
We moved to Butler. We married in 46. So many service people were coming back home and getting married. There was a housing shortage. So we moved in with Frank's parents and lived there for 2 years before we found a house that we could rent. And then you didn't go and look at a house and say, well, this is to this and that. You said, it's for rent, I'll take it, without even looking at it.
Right.
But I met most of the neighbors in Butler about the first week that we lived there, because the Methodist parsonage was down the block from the house, and there was a fire in an outbuilding there. And at night, I found out, or anytime there was a fire, everybody came in their bathrobes or whatever. They came to the fire. So I met most of my neighbors at night in their night clothes, watching the fire.
And they actually bring the chairs out so they can enjoy it, right?
That's right.
You know, that reminds me of a story, Miss Sarah. You remember my daddy, Ed, and
yes.
His neighbor called him one time and said, Ed, they had just got back from Macon, the neighbor had, and he called Daddy, woke him up, and said, Ed, I'm not trying to scare you, but it looks like the end of your house is on fire. And he went out. It was the neighbor's house, but Daddy was standing out there, and everybody in town came. But what Mama told me, Daddy was still in his boxer shorts. Until 6 a.m., he was still. She said, Ed, you've got to go put on some pants. Everybody in town's here. You stand out here in your underwear. But that kind of stuff happened. People just came as they were, right?
They came as they were. And if it was in the afternoon, well, when you heard the fire alarm, you picked up the telephone and the operator would tell you where the fire was. You didn't even have to ask her.
So that's a whole nother story. Talk about the phone system. People today, you know, the young people don't have a clue that they don't even know about call and collect or paying for a long distance phone call. But you guys had a party line and you had an operator uptown. Just talk a little bit about how that worked in those days when everybody knew everybody and how you would connect with somebody on the phone.
Our first telephone was on the wall, and it has a crank that you rang for the operator. And she would say something like, I would say, well, Mrs. Bird was the operator at that time. Miss Bird, ring Mama. And she'd say, honey, she's not there. I saw her going into so-and-so. And one day I had been making a lot of calls for a meeting or something. And she came on the line and said, Sarah, what are you doing? I've been so busy, I haven't had time to listen.
She knew everything that was going on in town, I guarantee you, right?
That's right.
All the comings and goings and what people were talking about and everything else.
Yep. If you needed help, you could tell her, and she'd do it. So
that's so funny. I know Mr. Frank died in 2015, and one of the most well-respected people I've ever known in my life. But you guys moved out in the country, and you moved out on the farm. I remember going out there delivering furniture out to your house out there on the river.
Mm-hmm. We built the house out there in, I think it was 78, and we had been going out there, and they kind of camped in a little house, little shed they had there when they went hunting and all. But we built this house and just loved it. And we had plenty of room for a lot of people. And as I have told people, they would ask me, well, what did you raise on the farm? And I would say boys, because we had 2 sons, and we had all these grandsons and great-grandsons and all their friends, and they were all welcome to come, and they loved farming and hunting and fishing and eating.
They loved being on that Flint River, right?
Yes, they did. So
you've raised a bunch of hunters and fishermen and folks that love to get on a tractor and love to get in the boat and float down the river, and people that like to hike and ride.
Right.
You've raised a bunch of outdoor people, that is for sure.
And it's amazing now, 2 of my grandsons are employed at these plantations where people come and pay a lot of money.
Right.
One of them is in charge of a plantation down in South Georgia.
Right.
And another one is on a plantation up around Covington. And it's just amazing to me that what they grew up doing on the farm, now they're getting paid to do.
Isn't that amazing? That's kind of how it works. When you were raising those boys to be outdoorsmen, you had no idea they could make a living doing that.
That is right.
Isn't that amazing?
They're very happy and they're enjoying it.
Well, you had a beautiful place. You have a beautiful place out there. There's another story that during the Depression that you knew about with the Riley family, that there were people out there that the Rileys were able to help during the Depression financially and in other ways. Talk a little bit about that.
This was during the Depression, and there were 5 families living on the farm. Now, Frank's parents never lived out there, but there were 5 families living there. And during that time, Frank's father would kill a cow or hog or whatever and have it butchered and pass the meat around to all the people there so that nobody went hungry. And they raised food, and he always saw to it that they didn't have a whole lot of money, but they had something to eat, and he took care of their other needs. That's how they made it through the Depression. There
were people there that he saw talent in, right? And that even helped to get better jobs.
There was one especially, this young man who was about Frank's age. In fact, he and Frank were very close friends. They went hunting and fishing together, and Dudley was just an exceptional person. So Mr. Riley knew that he needed more than just working on the farm, and he got him a job in Thomaston at the mill, and he soon became caregiver to the president of the mill, and that's where he spent his time taking care of this man. If we had sent him to college, he would have been a good doctor.
Wow.
But he was a fine person, and he always called Frank my white brother.
About that. One thing that touched me, that you guys remain friends, the families remain friends through the years, and then some of these guys that worked on that farm were pallbearers at Mr. Frank's funeral, right?
Oh, yes. There's one of them that I talk to every 2 or 3 months on the phone, and he said the 2 people in his life that meant the most to him were his grandmother and Frank Riley, because Frank he started working for Frank when he was just a teenager, and he's now a well-respected, he's a Baptist minister, in fact.
So, Miss Sarah, I want to talk about this whole basketball thing. You talked about raising those boys to be outstanding people and that love the outdoors and love all they do out there with down the river and farming and all the stuff they did. But you also had a couple of daughters that became pretty famous with the Lady Vikings, and some people have heard my previous podcast with Bunny Fuller Harris, that I had about 132 game winning streak. So you were right in the middle of that. During the first few years of that, Sissy and Judy were stars on that team. And just talk about what was going on in Butler doing that, as being a mother to 2 of the stars. And I've talked to several of the players, but I haven't talked to any parent on this podcast, and I know you probably got a different perspective.
Well, basketball season, that was all you did. I always lost about 15 pounds during basketball season. And anyway, it was very interesting because the forwards would always come home with Sissy and Judy, and they would stay at the house, and we'd have a pregame supper, and then we'd go to the games, and that went on every Tuesday and Friday, and that's what we did. And I'll tell you, the reason they were so good is because they would listen to Norman Carter,
Wow.
and they did as best they could, whatever he told them. I have seen them, he would tell them they needed to be in bed by a certain hour. They would go get into bed even if they were still doing their homework. They believed in doing what he said.
I've had a lot of people, including my wife, tell me that they had a healthy fear of Norman Carter. I can tell you that. They loved him, but they were also afraid of him. Definitely didn't want to disobey him, I think, right?
No, not at all. But that was a very important time, and we got so much support from the town. And as you know, everybody in town, when we went to tournaments, it was just like we'll just shut down the town because everybody went.
And it was a caravan, right? One car after another headed out of town.
Even if people didn't really like basketball, they went to those
absolutely.
games.
So talk about Sissy and Judy a minute. They were all-state players, both of them. They were very good. It had to be fun watching them do something very good. I have to think that helped them later on in life. That had nothing to do with basketball, but being in those situations where the crowd was expecting you to win and having to deliver and all that. Just talk about the impact. I know they still talk about it to this day.
Yes. Well, they learned then with basketball and 4-H and all of that, you paid attention to what you were taught, and you did it to the best of your ability, and you tried not to go off track too much. Anyway, it meant a lot to them and to all of us. And
it's a lot of fun, but huge lessons were being learned that have taken those now ladies very far in life. And I know that those days you look back on with a special fondness, and you and Mr. Frank both were involved in that. I know you never missed a game, no matter where they were. You were there.
Oh, that's right.
And that was very, very important to what was going on. Wow. Miss Sarah, you also been, and I think I first met you. You know, I grew up in the Methodist Church in Reynolds, and you guys were at the Methodist Church in Butler, so I knew you as we sometimes do joint stuff together. That church has always been very important to you, and I know Mr. Frank was a lay speaker in the Methodist Church. He traveled around. I remember him coming to Reynolds and speaking at various things. Taught Sunday school for years and years. Just talk about that. Talk about, I know you were a leader in that church. You were in women's stuff and children's activities, and I know you're still active. So just talk about what the church has meant to you through the years, specifically the Butler United Methodist Church.
Yeah. Well, when I first came here, the Butler Church was on a 5-church charge. So we had services, preaching service, 2 Sundays a month. Well, the Baptist Church here also was on a charge. So everybody went to the Methodist Church our 2 Sundays, and then they went to the Baptist Church when they had preaching on 2 Sundays. And that worked real well for a long time till the church leaders somewhere else decided, well, we need to keep our group together. And so we quit listening to anybody. And I wish we still had that spirit of cooperation and not competition between the denominations. But anyway, that's the way it is. But we had, as I said, we had 5 churches on the Butler charge. And the ministers who came here, well, one minister who came shortly after I got to Butler was Handy Hancock.
I remember him.
Yes, he went on and was the bishop in the Methodist Church, and they were some of our closest friends.
He preached a lot of funerals. He'd come back and preach funerals over here, and I remember him well, yes. He was a great speaker.
He was a great speaker and a very fine gentleman. And we had a lot of ministers that were our very close friends, and that meant a lot. But the church was just Frank's father and had been in that church. His family had grown up with it, and his mother was a Baptist, so 2 Sundays in each place suited us fine.
Yeah. So tell me this, you're 98. You can certainly got a lot of years to look back on. And
Yes.
one of the things we see changing in our society is in most places, everything doesn't revolve around the church anymore. I mean, the church was very important part of your life and your children's life. And you kind of, life revolved around that. And it was, whether you were a Baptist or Methodist or Primitive Baptist or whatever you were, it was still part of the fabric of our society, where at least there was checks and balances on people's behavior and how they lived and thoughts about God. What do you think is happening now? What do you think the result is going to be, I guess, is that you see less and less people going to church, less and less people even that being important in their lives. What's your thoughts on that when you look back?
I pray for my little great-granddaughters and sons, because they are not going to have the world that we had to grow up in. The moral fiber of our country has changed totally. Anything is acceptable now. And our churches are not the important part that they once were, which is a very sad situation. When somebody moved to Butler, the first thing anybody asked them was, "What church do you belong to?"
Mm-hmm.
That was very important. But now, oh, you go to church.
And the other thing you did is when you found that out, in your case, you found out they were Methodists or whoever found out, you were all over them. You were accepting them. They immediately were able to meet people and have friends and have people to socialize with and everything else. That was what everything revolved around, right?
That's exactly right. We had them over for dinner at night, and we went to visit them, and they came. The children played with our children, and it was just the way of life. And now you notice that the ministers, the ministerial people, are not respected as they once were.
That's true.
Ministers used to be held in very high regard.
You're right. They were a very important part of everything that was going on. And it is kind of scary to think about it. I know I was born in 54, and our lives revolved around the church. And in that was not just the preaching and the singing and all that, but it was all these relationships, lifelong relationships you built. You never had to worry about having some place to go because there was something always going on. And it was a big part of the fabric of our society, and that's scary a little bit. I know that you've seen a lot of changes in your life from living from the 1920s to the 2020s. I can't imagine where you would start, but what is the biggest things you see besides what we just talked about, the church part, but what do you see as being the biggest changes that you've seen in our country?
The first thing I think that really is the root cause of a lot of this upheaval is communication. Somebody can put something out on the internet and everybody believes it. So whatever they say, that's it.
Right.
And all the social media, I think, I wish it could work for good, but I'm afraid it's not. I'm not on the internet. I can get a little news off my phone, but I'm not on Facebook or any of that.
But you're correct. Used to, you didn't know somebody else's business. You really didn't know somebody's opinion unless they personally told it to you. And now you know everything, and we're on communication overload, and there's really some adverse consequences to that. You've got so much division, all that going on, and I think you're right. I think all the so easy to communicate is part of the big reason for that, right?
I think so. I used to write letters, but nobody writes a letter now. They can call people so easily, but they just Well, I try to tell people, some of my friends here sometimes, oh, my grandson did this. Oh, yes, I saw it on Facebook. So they know things about my family that I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's the way it goes.
So let me ask you this question. Where is it going? If it is there now, where will it be in 20 years? I have no idea, but it's scary to think about it for sure.
It is.
Well, I agree with you. That's not only has communication changed, but really hadn't thought about what you're saying. The consequences of being on overload communication is affecting us, right?
Yes, it is. It definitely is.
Now, there is some good that comes out of it. Like you said, it could be very good to be able to keep up with people, to be able to know, to be able to. I tell you, a birthday on Facebook is like nothing else. There's a negative to it, but everything that's good, there's negative. What else you think, Miss Sarah, that jumps out at you that has changed the biggest, that has impacted the most in your life?
We can, travel easily now. During the Depression and the war years, if a family had a car, that was great if they could afford the gasoline. And then, of course, during the war, gasoline was rationed, as was any leather goods or a lot of clothing and so forth. So travel was restricted. Now people can go anywhere and be there. Just two of my granddaughters went out to Los Angeles to the national championship. Now that would have been a lifetime trip
for sure. And it would have taken a long time to get there too, right?
Yes. I just wish that we could still have the respect for people that we once had. That's one thing, we don't respect anybody anymore.
Have you ever seen the division like it is now, from not only religious division or theological division or this whole political division? It's so much, it seems like racial division. It seems like it's so much hate and division that it's unlike anything I've seen. Don't you think about that sometimes?
Yes, I do a lot. I know there was a lot that went on that was not right back in the past, but speaking of the racial part, but the politicians want to keep that stirred up, so we aren't going to get over it.
Talking about politicians, the political thing is, used to, you'd have Democrats and Republicans and they'd have opposite opinions, but they all went out to eat together and they got along. They went to church together. They had different political opinions, which was fine, but now it's just turned to the division is so much. It's hatred going on, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You certainly have been involved in the church. You still have people come to your house for meetings and stuff that you leave your door open for them, right? So they can come in this small town. You still are involved in that church. But talk a little bit, if you don't mind, just about the underlying reason for that. You have been a woman for many years of deep faith. And just talk about your faith just a little bit. I think people need to hear it. We talk about why people need to go to church, but the truth is you go to church because of your deep faith in God, right?
That is right. People who have questions about that, I never even thought about questioning that. I grew up, the Lord is in charge, and I had faith in the Lord, and that was it. Nobody even thought of questioning that. Now, they want to argue with you about it.
Well, one thing I can tell you, whether they argue about it or not, the Lord's still in charge, isn't he?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I remember, the Presbyterian young people, children, had to learn what they call the shorter catechism. And the first question in that is, what is the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Now, if we would keep that in mind and forget about politics, our children would have a chance.
Miss Sarah, you're 98 years old. I don't know how long that you're going to be here on this earth, but we know God's in charge, right? You can rest in that.
Absolutely.
I think that the people that know you and have loved you for so many years will say to you, you have been a huge blessing to a lot of folks. And I'm thankful that our paths crossed. Thank God for people like you.
Well, I appreciate that, Bruce. I've been very fortunate to grow up in a Christian home with Christian parents and friends that would uphold me and encourage me in everything. And I'm very thankful.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.